Well, Conservatives in the Turnbull government are coordinating around multiple amendments to the bill that will legalise same-sex marriage. Religious protections, freedom of speech and the rights of parents are just some of the complicated areas up for argument. Passage of the bill through the upper house by Thursday is already looking pretty ambitious. Liberal Senator for Victoria James Paterson is a key author of the Conservative amendments. Senator, welcome to RN Drive.
Thank you for having me, Patricia.
Firstly, on some breaking news, Nationals MP Lou O'Brien will support the move to create a banking inquiry. This means the numbers are there in the House to get this up. Will this be read as a vote of no confidence in the Turnbull government?
I think it's just a reflection of the deeply held views of a couple of National MPs in particular, and obviously the Labor Party very keen to take advantage of the brief dip in numbers that the coalition's experiencing due to some by-elections. So I don't think you can read much more into it than that.
When you're in coalition with a party that's trying to take advantage of your own party's disadvantage, it's not a good look, is it?
Well, we've always jealously guarded the right of our backbench MPs in particular to vote with their conscience and to cross the floor when they feel very strongly about an issue. In fact, we've been encouraged to do so more often in other debates recently. So I'm certainly not going to tell my colleagues that they can't exercise that freedom now. I disagree with them on this issue. I don't think we should have a banking royal commission, but I don't think it represents anything other than how very sincerely they feel about it.
Doesn't it just demonstrate that the government is completely divided on this issue?
I don't think 2 MPs out of 76 in a normal day in the lower house represents kind of anything more than a small number.
Do you think Australians are really going to look at this and say, oh, no big deal?
I don't know how Australians will look at it, but I can only tell you what the truth is, which is that 2 people crossing the floor is 2 people crossing the floor. It doesn't reflect anything wider than that.
Let's move to your amendments on same-sex marriage. Lots of amendments. You've abandoned your bill, but you've actually taken some elements with you in your amendments. It includes having 2 definitions for marriage. You want to keep the definition of marriage as being between a man and a woman, as well as having a separate definition that covers same-sex couples. Why would you have 2 definitions when Australians have just voted overwhelmingly against a separation?
Well, what the Australians were asked in the postal survey was, should we change the law to allow same-sex couples to marry? And this would be a change in the law that allows same-sex couples to marry. What Australian people were not asked in the survey was, do you want to abolish the current definition of marriage and replace it with a new one? That would be a different question and it might have had a different result. So what this change does is preserves the traditional definition of marriage as roughly 4.9 million Australians believe in it, and also a new definition of marriage that is inclusive of same-sex couples on equal standing in the law. There will be no difference in how couples married under the law will be treated.
So if there's no legal difference, why would you build into the law something that's just symbolic?
It's not symbolic entirely, because I suspect in the future if someone is taken to a tribunal for sharing their view about same-sex marriage, or if a teacher is told that they must teach a particular version of marriage, they will take some comfort and some legal benefit from being able to point to the law and say, my view of marriage, that it should remain traditional between a man and a woman, is still reflected in the law, even though the law also allows same-sex couples to marry. So I think this achieves the best of both worlds in that it does allow same-sex couples to marry, but it doesn't unnecessarily abolish the old definition of marriage, which many Australians still sincerely believe in.
It's interesting you say that Australians didn't vote for that, but Australians, I reckon, were pretty clear on what they were voting on, and they were voting on a new definition of marriage to include same-sex couples. It seems that your interpretation of the result is out of step with actually what people were asked.
Well, the only thing we can say with great confidence, Patricia, is the question. And the question was very clear, and it said, should we change the law to allow same-sex couples to marry? I think most Australians voted in favour, as I did, on the basis that they don't want gay couples to be prevented from being married as they are today under the law, and they want that law changed, and that's what my amendment will deliver.
Your amendment's trying to build into the law the fact that these people are different. You're actually trying to draw attention to their difference.
No, that's not my motivation, Patricia.
But that's what it does.
Well, that might be your characterisation, but I don't accept it and I don't agree with it. The law will change to allow gay couples to marry as I've long advocated and strongly believe in, but it's not necessary at the same time to abolish the traditional definition of marriage, which many Australians still believe in. Those Australians should not be able to prevent gay Australians from being married, but it's not necessary to do away with their beliefs at the same time.
You want parents to be able to remove their child from classes if they don't agree with the teaching on gay marriage. But the Federal Education Minister, Simon Birmingham, your colleague, says this could be unconstitutional as the states deliver on those sorts of things. Is it unconstitutional?
The advice that I have is that it's not, and it would use the external affairs power to deliver two promises that Australia has made in signing international treaties, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, both of which say that parents have the right to control the moral and religious education of their children. So it's quite common for federal legislation to rest on this external affairs power and to, if need be, override any inconsistent state laws. But there are no inconsistent state laws at the moment, to my knowledge. So that legal conflict would only arise if a state government sought to challenge it on the basis of it being inconsistent with state laws.
And where did you get that legal advice?
We've had a combination of external legal advisors and the Office of Parliamentary Counsel assisting in drafting the bill, which has now been converted into amendments.
You want civil celebrants to be able to refuse to wed gay couples based on their beliefs, religious or otherwise. Doesn't this create more space for discrimination? And again, isn't it at odds with what Australians voted for, which was to remove discrimination?
Well, there are now 3 different amendments seeking to better protect civil celebrants than they are in the current bill. One is moved by me, a supporter of same-sex marriage. Another is moved by Senator George Brandis, another supporter of same-sex marriage. And the third is moved by David Leyonhjelm, another supporter of same-sex marriage. So this is not about standing in the way of same-sex couples being married at all. It is just about making sure that someone who is a civil celebrant, who's practiced their business as a civil celebrant for years and has a belief in marriage the traditional way, can't be forced to solemnise a marriage that goes against their beliefs. It's just consistent with the protections that we have for religious ministers and for civil celebrants who have religious faith, which is in the Smith Bill, but not civil celebrants with conscientious objection, which is not in the Smith Bill.
And the other element is you've dropped the amendment that would allow for businesses to refuse gay weddings. That's the bakers and the florists, I don't know, anyone who has a business that provides these sort of services. Why aren't you pursuing this anymore?
That's right, Patricia. For a couple of reasons. First and foremost, that it was misconstrued as a desire to extend or expand discrimination against gay couples,
you say it was misconstrued,
never in my intention.
But when it provided the opportunity for people to basically, all businesses to say no gay weddings, that was obvious discrimination, wasn't it?
Well, what it provided for, Patricia, was a protection of religious freedom and freedom of conscience. And yes, those rights sometimes do clash with other rights, including anti-discrimination law, and it is a very difficult question to decide when they do clash, how we resolve those differences. My main objective was ensuring that there would be no legal cases and court cases to resolve those disputes, because I think that would really spoil what should be a really, wonderful moment for Australia and a really significant moment in Australian history, which should be a joyful moment. I don't want to see that end up in court cases. But as I said, that part of the amendment has been dropped. And
one of your other amendments seeks to create a shield for people to hold a traditional view of marriage. How would this shield look and work?
Basically, the intention behind that part of the amendments is that people who hold a traditional view of marriage shouldn't have adverse action taken against them by government or agents of government. So that's very important, because we know that both in Australia and around the world there have been calls for governments to actively discriminate against people based on their views of marriage. So, for example, during the postal survey, we had a petition calling for a doctor to have their registration revoked because of that doctor's belief in traditional version of marriage. Now, if my amendments pass, the relevant authority which grants that doctor a licence will not be able to take away their licence purely because they have a traditional view of marriage.
And will your amendments pass? Because, I've talked to some others that are watching this very closely, and I don't think you have the numbers.
Well, I'm moving 5 amendments, and each of them I think will attract different levels of support. It's too early to say, in my view, which of those will pass.
Yeah, no, and let me ask you, because that's the obvious question. Which ones do you think have the most support and the most chance of passing?
Well, what I was about to say is it's too early to say, and it depends in part, Patricia, on what the Labor Party decides to do on amendments. I'm aware of a number of Labor senators who would like to vote for amendments that increase protections for religious liberty and other freedoms, but it is not yet clear, Labor has not yet stated categorically whether they will have a free vote on amendments or whether they only have a free vote on the final bill. There is a difference of opinion within the Labor Party on that, and until we know what that is, we won't be able to say with confidence what can pass and what can't pass.
There's the religious freedoms inquiry announced by the Prime Minister that Philip Ruddock is heading. Results are due next year, I think it's March, which will inform a separate debate. Why not wait until then?
Well, I think that's a really positive move and I welcome it, but that will be a much, much broader debate and a much more complex debate that will encompass a range of issues, and I suspect it will take a long time to resolve. In the meantime, the law will have already changed to allow same-sex couples to marry, and in the meantime, it's possible that other people's freedoms will have been adversely affected, and I don't want to see that happen, so I think we need to deal with it in the Marriage Act. It's also possible that the outcome of the Ruddock review is that we don't agree on the path forward and therefore no changes are going to take place. And if that's the case, then we may end this process with no protections for freedoms. And I think that would be a very dangerous thing.
I've spoken to people who tell me that, you know, it's unusual that you've decided to be the leading voice on these amendments, and that some people think that you feel like your pre-selection is in question in Victoria, that there are clearly right-wingers who are concerned about, and Conservatives concerned about the direction there. Are you trying to sort of curry favour with them?
I've been consistent on this issue since June 2011 when I was first asked publicly about same-sex marriage. I said at that time that I support same-sex marriage, but I don't want to see it come at the expense of other people's freedoms. And in the dozens and dozens of media interviews I've done since that time, I've given the same answer, outlining the same issues. I was a member of the Senate inquiry that Dean Smith was a member of earlier this year into this issue. And if you go back and look at the Hansard, you'll see the sorts of questions I asked go to the heart of these issues. And during the same-sex marriage survey, I did a speech and wrote an op-ed foreshadowing what I'd be doing after the postal survey ended if there was a yes result. So I've been utterly consistent on this for many years since prior to entering Parliament. So I can assure you that I'm motivated by my genuine views on this issue, not by any other kind of political imperatives. And can I say, there are a lot easier ways to appeal to Liberal Party pre-selectors, if that is your motivation, than putting out a controversial draft bill, which is going to attract some criticism and some support.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Patricia.
And that's Liberal Senator for Victoria, James Paterson. What do you make